Thank you so much for speaking to what I think is the 7th or 8th year of my classes. We're incredibly grateful.
Well, Arvind, it's always a pleasure and an honor, and in spite of all my uh, past issues and bloopers, you keep calling me back, which is great. And the other thing is you and your class are willing to serve as guinea pigs, which is also really good. So this time I have a brand new talk that I have never given before. So it's a first time I'm giving this, which is exciting for me. So, but hopefully it'll go over okay on your end, and everyone will like it as well. Is the audio good?
It's flawless.
All right, perfect. Okay. So anyway, a few thousand years ago, we were told about Moses going to the top of the mountain and then coming back with the commandments, the Ten Commandments. And that story is slightly off. So, I have a lot of conversations with God, and in one of my conversations, he said that, Mohnish, when Moses was coming down the mountain, he dropped the tablets, and they shattered into many different pieces. And so my commandments were lost, but he felt really bad, and humanity was expecting these commandments, so he made them up. And we've never had the real commandments. So he gave me the real commandments to usher onto the world through Arvind's BC class. And so that's what I'm going to try to do. And so God also said that he really wanted to focus the commandments on investment managers and not humanity. And unfortunately, Moses kind of broadened the scope of the task he had been given. And so these are the commandments for investment managers. And Moses was right. They're exactly 10 commandments. So he got that part correct. But anyway, the first commandment. So I don't know how long these are going to take to go through. So I'll try to speed them along so that we have enough time for Q&A and such. And certainly if the flock is looking for more clarity on one or more commandments, we can certainly do that during the Q&A. So anyway, the first commandment is thou shalt not skim off the top. And what the Lord means by that is that, one of the things with all these commandments is that the reason they are being presented is that most participants in the investment management business violate them, and they are sinners. And so we are trying to kind of improve the lot, if you will. So skimming off the top basically is setting up an investment operation where you're either taking, some percentage of fees as a fixed fee, and in the case of hedge funds, they're usually taking 1 or 2% of the top, and they're adding performance fees on top. And two of the original practitioners, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, they practiced the art with no fees off the top. So Buffett had, I think, 0.625 once he merged all his partnerships, I think in 1962, where he took no fees off the top. And Charlie, I think, had a third, I think 1/3 above zero is my belief. I think that's what he did. But of course, that was a kind of specialist operation, a little different operation that he was running, and very little capital. But the bottom line is that both Buffett and Munger have said that if you're in the investment management business, what should have already happened before you set up your own shop or started managing other people's money is practice the art on your with your own limited assets. And if you did well with those assets, then the power of compounding is such that even a small amount of money becomes quite significant after a few years. I mean, if you're compounding at anything north of 15, 20, 25%, which you should be able to do on small amounts of capital, I mean, your money will be doubling every kind of 4 to 7 years type deal, and so even a small amount becomes fairly large in a few years, which gives you the ability to in effect live off that base while the assets are growing. So anyway, that's the first commandment. The second commandment, thou shalt not have an investment team. So again, investment management is not a team sport. It's really designed to be an individual pursuit. And an investing team is in many ways an oxymoron. And one of the there are many reasons why it's an oxymoron, but one of the basic reasons is that any two humans are going to have differing circles of competence. And so if I were to have, for example, an analyst on my team, and that analyst was very bright, and he or she came up with some investment ideas, I may reject them simply because I have a different circle of competence, and so which is really not doing justice to the analyst, if you will. And the second is that we don't need that many stocks in our portfolio, and so in a year we have plenty of time to research many stocks and to find 2, 3, or 4 of them that kind of fit the bill, if you will. So they shouldn't. And the other thing is the investment analysis process is really the fun part of the job. So you really don't want to be delegating the fun part, because I wouldn't know what you'd be doing then if you weren't kind of analyzing investments. That's the most fun part. Then the third commandment, thou shalt accept that thou shalt be wrong at least 1/3 of the time. And some of these commandments leaked out from God over the years, and this comes from John Templeton, and basically the investment process is one where we are extrapolating, or we are trying to extrapolate the future of a business, or the future of many businesses, and by definition that is a very inexact science. There are a multitude of factors that are going to affect every business into the future, and especially when we're trying to forecast or figure out what happens to a business 5 years from now or 10 years from now. It is an exercise fraught with difficulties, and definitely fraught with a high error rate. And so basically, if I were to pick, or let's say my current portfolio, if 10 stocks made up most of the portfolio, there are probably at least 4 of them that will not behave in the future in the way I expected them to behave when I made the investment. So it doesn't mean that 40% of the time I will lose money. What will happen is that at least 40% of the time I will either not make as much money as I thought, or I might lose money on some investments, or they might flatline, or they might even do better. far better than I thought. All of the above, and so this is a this is an exercise in humility in terms of managing investments, and one has to always accept the fact that the future trajectory of businesses is and predicting that trajectory is at best an inexact science. And so we have to be kind of humble enough to accept the fact that even our highest conviction ideas may or may not get to where we expect to get them to. Then we get to commandment number 4. Thou shalt look for hidden PE of 1 stocks. And so here's the way the world works. So maybe there are around, let's say, 50,000 publicly traded companies globally. And let's say I set up a screen which said I want to look at all companies that trade at 40 times earnings or less. The odds are I'd have a kind of tens of thousands of businesses that would fit that screen. If then I change that to a PE of 30, I'd still have several thousand businesses. PE of 20, still several thousand. PE of 10, still maybe north of 1,000, maybe well above that. And as I keep tightening that noose, to PE of 5, PE of 3, PE of 1, there will still be some businesses that will slip through. Now, those are the non-hidden PE of 1s. But what we want to look for is the hidden PE of 1s, which means they are a PE of 1, but they don't show up as such on a screen. So, for example, and they can be a PE of 1 based on future earnings. They may not be a PE of 1 on today's earnings. I mean, in 2012, when I invested in Fiat Chrysler, it was trading at less than $5 a share, and the company had forecasted that in a few years, actually 2018, that they would make about $5 a share. And actually, as we are coming into 2018, they spun off Ferrari. But if I include the whole pie, including Ferrari, they exceeded that number. So what we paid in 2012, PE of 1, materialized in 2018, and so the end result is that investment went up 7 or 8x in that period. So generally speaking, when you do PE of 1s, in general, good things happen to you. And another stock I think I'd mentioned in your class, Arvind, a few years back was IPSCO. It was a steel company. And at the time I was investing in IPSCO, I think it was 2004 or thereabouts, 2004, 2005. And IPSCO was trading, if you just screened it, it was trading at 3 times earnings. But 1/3 of the market cap was in cash. And so if you kind of adjust it for the cash, because they were trading at 2 times earnings, and the earnings in the next 2 years with the company's own guidance and such was what the company expected to make in cash flows in the next 2 years. And so basically you had 1/3 in cash and in the next 2 years earnings coming out, and there was absolutely no visibility beyond the 2 years. So this was a very cyclical business. It was possible that after 2 years, earnings would just fall off a cliff. But my thinking then was that if we held the stock for 2 years, we got all our money back. And at that point, I just wanted to see what the stock would trade at. It had to trade for something because it had all these huge plants and infrastructure and everything else. And so what happened in that case is a year after I bought the stock, the company announced they had one more year of visibility and earnings were going to continue the way they had been happening, which means now we had in effect 3 years of visibility. So we were in the black. And then as we were getting close to 2 years, someone came and bought the company, and we ended up with about a 4x return on the initial purchase in less than 2 years. And so anyway, the PEO ones, what I noticed is that in the last 19 years or so that I've been running Pabrai funds, it's happened at least 6 or 7 times that we found PEO ones like Fiat Chrysler or like IPSCO. Very early on, I had invested in Stewart Enterprises, which was in the funeral services business. That actually was sitting at a PE of 2 in Value Line. I opened up Value Line as I do every week. I always look for the PE of 1s in Value Line. Usually they're not there, but you can find PE of 2s quite commonly. Usually those are businesses that are good to avoid. But every once in a while, there is a gem that shows up. So, for example, the reason I was kind of interested in Stewart Enterprises when it showed up is that they're in the business of burying dead people. And they're in the funeral services business. And one thing I had read a long time ago about the funeral services business is that out of all the business SIC codes, industry categorizations, funeral homes have the lowest rate of business failure. So if you look at across industries, across a number of any industry, the lowest rate of business failure is funeral homes. And the reason for that actually becomes obvious if you think about it. So first of all, no one in this classroom, all of you gifted people, is planning to go into the funeral services business. I can almost bet on that. There are no 22-year-olds I know of who say, you know what, I think I'm going to go into the funeral services business because it has the lowest rate of failure. It's such an awesome business. That's what I'm going to do. This doesn't happen. So first of all, the people entering the business are few and far between. And then the second is that when your aunt or uncle who you love so much passes away, you don't go about seeking the low bid to have their last rites done. You might at the most reach out to, typically you'll reach out to the place that ideally your family has been using for many generations, and hopefully get it done that way. But even if that's not the case, you'll try to reach out to some neighborhood funeral services operation, and whatever they tell you, you're not going to start negotiating on the phone, and you're probably not even making 5 calls to get the lowest bid. So this is not a business where you're going to seek out, unless you hated that particular relative, you're not going to particularly seek out a low bid. And of course, you've got all the upsells with air-conditioned coffins and everything else in between to make you feel really good. And anyway, so basically, the hidden PEO ones is really good for your health and your financial health. I mean, and so looking for them is a great exercise. And in fact, I just got back from Istanbul last night, and I think it was only PEO ones that I visited. I was swimming in PEO ones. It was quite the orgasmic experience. Anyway, so that's commandment number 4, to go hunting for PEO ones. Then commandment 5, thou shalt never use Excel. So this actually kind of goes hand in hand with commandment 4, and even it goes hand in hand with not having an investment team. But basically, if you can figure it out in your head. So the investment process is really quite simple. If a company, let's say, has a market cap of $1 billion, and let's say it's trading at 20 times earnings. So trailing earnings are 50 million, for example, and let's assume those are owner earnings that you can withdraw as dividends and such to keep it simple. Well, the $1 billion market cap, whether that is undervalued or overvalued or fairly valued, one can only make a judgment of that if one can figure out the cash flows that are coming out of the business over the next, it's from now to Judgment Day, but you can approximate that to be now, between now and the next 10 or 20 years, because after that it really doesn't matter. The terminal values become too small. And so if this business is trading at 20 times earnings, and if earnings are expected to grow at, let's say, 10 or 15% a year, then what you can do, and if you have a very high degree of conviction that 10 or 15% rate of earnings growth is sustainable for a very long period of time, maybe 15 or 20 years, then you can actually, run the math. You can say, okay, year one, the earnings are 50 million, year two, the earnings are 60 million, year three, the earnings are, if you're growing at 20%, but if you're growing at 10%, 50, 55, 60 and a half, 66 and change, and just keep going from there. And then you have to discount each of those by your expected rate of return. So for example, if I want a 20% rate of return on this investment, I have to start discounting those future cash flows at that 20% rate, and then I have to, because if I'm getting 55 million a year from now, my cost of capital is 20 million. So that 55 million is really worth like 44 million because I'm not getting it today. And so as I discount all those future cash flows and run those numbers, it will be very hard to get to 1 billion because the earnings are growing at 10%, but your expectation is 20. So it will be a kind of a declining future stream. Every year will be less than 50 million, in effect, and in present value. And so the math just doesn't work. Now, if you reduce your return expectations to something like 8%, it may work. If you said, I only want a 7 or 8% return, that may work. But even then, there are some heroic assumptions. And we already saw what Templeton said, that you're going to be wrong 1/3 of the time, and capitalism is brutal. So unless this is a fast-growing funeral services operation, it's not going to be there clocking 20% or 10% a year for 15 years because it's just difficult in business to have that much of a runway without people coming in to take your moat away. And so the thing is that how do we get around that? Well, the way we get around that is by making the math really simple. And the way we make the math really simple is we go back to PE of 1. And when we go back to PE of 1, all the math becomes really easy. Because then if I want to make like 25% a year, well, I get my money back in 2 or 3 years and I still have the business, is still producing cash, and you'll find that it'll deliver that return. And it might deliver that return at a PE of 2 as well, or 3 as well. And but once you start getting to high single digits or double digits, generally speaking, the math doesn't work so well. It's a lot harder to make it work. And I think, like, for example, if we were to look at, I mean, I think like a simple case is if we look at uh, a business like Apple. So let's take a simple case that Apple is worth exactly $1 trillion. I haven't been tracking it. I think it's a little bit above that. But let's say it's exactly $1 trillion. And let's say I want I'm an unreasonable guy and I want a like 25% annual return on my capital, for example. Arvind knows my license plate says compound 26. Um, so if I want a 25 or 26% return on my money, the first year that business has to produce 260 billion in owner earnings. And I don't think that's what Apple is producing right now. I'm not quite sure. Maybe someone in the class knows, or maybe you can look it up, Arvind. Arvind, what is the trailing PE of Apple, approximately? Is it like 10 times or something?
I think it's higher than that, but I can get it for you.
Yeah. So, but let's be generous. Let's say it's trading at 10 times earnings. Let's say that what it's saying is that Apple's making 100 billion a year. Okay. So I need 260 billion for my 26% or 25%. It's making, let's say, 100 billion, and then a year from now, let's say it's 115 billion. Let's say I'll give it that they've got a rocking market position. Earnings grow by 15%. It goes to 115 billion, and let's say for the next 10 years it's compounding at 15%. Even with 100 billion in earnings compounding at 15% for 10 years, which means that in the 10th year it will be 400 billion, because in 5 years it'll double to 200 billion, and 10 years it'll double again to 400 billion. That 10th year 400 billion is not worth 260 billion today, because when I discount that at the 26% rate, it will go down below 100, because it's just it needs to be doubling every 3 years and such. So anyway, the bottom line is that if your return expectations are something like 7% a year, and Apple is growing at 6-7% a year or something, it may work. So one of the things that you can do with just playing with these 2-3 numbers, which is market cap, current earnings, and what you expect earnings to grow at, and of course, I think a lot of people would have difficulty getting to assumptions that Apple will grow 15% a year, bottom line, for 10 or 15 years without any hiccups. That may happen. It's a very dominant company in a dominant position, but we've seen a lot of past dominant companies have problems in these areas. So the thing is that when I look at something like Apple, it doesn't even take a femtosecond to take a pass. And now, if we had Apple at like something like 3 times earnings, like $1 trillion market cap, making 350 billion a year, growing at whatever, 15% or something, even someone like me might get interested. So the thing is that a PE of 3 on Apple might get me excited, and a PE of 10, not quite as exciting. And
Mohnish, my TA is saying that the PE is closer to 20 times, so you're going to be a lot less excited.
Ouch, man, that's so hard. And so the thing is that so if you run this same math, starting at 50 billion, which is where trailing earnings are, and even if you take heroic assumptions of 20% growth, unabated, I still can't get to the promised land. As you know, with the commandments, I've been to the promised land, but I can't get to the promised land with it. So that was the fifth commandment, thou shalt never use Excel. And as you saw with all the math we did, we didn't even need a calculator. Forget Excel. We just did it in our heads. So there is no need for Excel. And if you find yourself reaching for Excel, what that means is you take a pass. It's an automatic pass the moment you feel, oh, I need Excel to figure this out. If you need Excel, it means you need to take a pass. If you can't do the math on the fingers in one hand, you need to take a pass. If you're going to two hands, there's a problem. You need to be doing the math with one hand and no calculator and what's between your ears. That's it. Like I said, these are all things that Arvind will never talk to you about. It's only me and you that can talk about such things. Then commandment number 6, thou shalt always have a rope to climb out of the deepest well. So in case some of you didn't understand that fully, let me try to decipher what the good Lord meant by commandment number 6. So when I was growing up, my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was really good at starting a number of businesses with nothing, no capital, and he was really good at getting them to some scale. I mean, some of these would get up to north of 100 employees and such. I mean, they would move pretty quickly, but he was always very aggressive with his growth plans and leverage and such, and overly optimistic, and invariably these businesses would blow up. And so he went through a number of bankruptcies. So when I was growing up, and my parents were very bad kind of financial planners or savers. So as the business did, so did our household fortunes, if you will. So when the business was doing well, things were loose and going well at home. And when the business blew up, we didn't have money for rent. We didn't have money for groceries. We were, asking relatives to help us out, asking friends. And so it was a tough situation. And one time, I think when I was like about maybe 9 or 10 years old, and my father had gone bankrupt, he had this guy who was a astrologer show up to our house, our apartment, every Sunday. And this astrologer would have all these, orange robes with a bunch of marks on his forehead, with a bald head and all that. And he would have all these different charts, and he would tell my father about the future. And then my father would pay him, and then the guy would come the following week. And this was kind of a weekly thing going on. And I told my dad, after observing this for a few weeks, that, because my dad was an engineer, he was a very rational guy. And I said, you have to know that this person is just talking utter nonsense, And so my dad said to me that I am at the bottom of a well, and I need a rope to climb out of the well. And this orange robed guy is my rope, because when I pay him, he makes sure that he tells me that the future is great. Because he knows if he says that the future is not great, he's not coming back the following week. So every week when I have my session with him, he is telling me about these future businesses I'm going to start and all this prosperity that's going to come. And I need something to climb out of the well that I'm in. And one of the things that surprised me repeatedly about my dad was that the ability to bounce back. I mean, I noticed as he got older that his bounce back was harder than it used to be when he was younger. I think it was just harder going through it over and over. But I was always very surprised at the quickness with which, as he was, putting one business the last semblance of it going under, he was already kind of thinking about the next one and such. So in the investment business, we are going to have gyrations. And we're going to have periods when performance is great, and we're going to have periods when performance is not so great. And so, for example, in the financial crisis, 2008-09, Pabrai funds from the peak in June of 2007 to the bottom in March of 2009, the funds dropped between 65 and 70%. It's a huge drop. And when I told you about commandment number 1, thou shalt not skim off the top. So basically, if my fund were worth, let's say, $600 million or thereabouts, let's say in June of 2007, basically by June of 2008, in order to collect a fee, it needed to be at least 636 million, 6% return, and then I get paid. Instead, the funds were below 200 million. So 600 million goes to 200 million. The base level required to earn a fee is 636 million. I am in a very deep well. And so I thought back to the guy in the orange robes. And unfortunately, I didn't have his email address. And I don't even know if he was alive then. He may have passed away probably. So I was looking for the guy in the orange robes, but he was nowhere to be found. So I said, I'm at the bottom of the well and I need a rope. I need a rope to pull me out. And what I did is I violated commandment number 5. I first sought the forgiveness of the Lord and said, in order to follow commandment number 6, I need to temporarily get a pass on commandment number 5. And after many years, I fired up Excel. And what I did is I took my portfolio and I put in prices for all the stocks that were in my portfolio at the end of 2010 and at the end of 2011. So I put my best guess as what these companies would be trading at the end of 2010 and then 2011. And of course, things had collapsed. There were things. There were a lot of bargains at that time. Anything I was investing in went up several times after that. And when I looked at the numbers of the aggregate portfolio at the end of 2010 and at the end of 2011, it was well north of 600 million. Partially because I had control over what went into those cells. Just like the astrologer had control over what he was going to say the future was going to do. And, like we hear about Steve Jobs' distorted reality field. We need distorted reality to climb out of wells. And so what I did is, instead of focusing on the $200 million number in my mind, I focused on the 2010 or 2011 number when I was going to be in fee earning territory and life would be, great, happy days would be here again. And that actually worked. In fact, I still have the spreadsheet, and every once in a while, if I feel that we are in a well and we need to climb out, I'll always go back to that. And so I don't use Excel for doing investment analysis. I do use Excel to climb out of wells, and it works pretty well. So you always need, not only in investing but in life, a rope to climb out of deep wells. So it is a guarantee that both in investing and in life, you will find yourself in deep wells. Life would be quite boring if that didn't happen. So that's commandment number 6. And commandment number 7, thou shalt be singularly focused like Arjuna. And of course, no one knows Arjuna better than Arvind, because a few years back, Arvind sent me a nice painting, and the painting showed a guy with a bow firing at a target. And I think the guy was Arjuna in the painting. So anyway, there's an Indian epic which was written a few thousand years ago called the Mahabharata. And in the Mahabharata, there is one of the heroes is this great warrior and archer called Arjuna. And when Arjuna was being trained as an archer, his teacher one day told all his students that he's going to have a practical test for them. And he basically set up a long pole, and at the end of the pole, he put a fish, kind of a sculpture of a fish, and the fish had a tiny couple of blue eyes, small blue eyes. Then he put this pole in a kind of a pool of water, a tub of water, and he told his students that he wanted them to look at the water to see the reflection of the fish and the eye of the fish, and to shoot the eye out. So, and these were all kind of nobility, princes of different kingdoms. So the first prince steps up to take his test, and before he fires his bow, the teacher asks him, Dronacharya asked him, what do you see? He says, oh, I see the water, the pole, the fish. And so the guy says, okay, sit down, you're not ready for the test. And then the second prince stands up, and again the teacher asks him, what do you see? He says, I can see the pole, I can see the fish, I can see the eye of the fish. So the guy tells him, you're not ready to shoot, sit down. And one by one, the different princes stand up, tell their teacher what they see, and they're not allowed to shoot the bow. And finally, our hero Arjuna stands up, and he's asked what he sees, and he says that I can only see the center of the eye of the fish. And so Dronacharya tells him, fire at will. And of course, he takes the eye out. And so one of the lessons we need to learn from Arjuna is that we need to be focused like him. So anytime we're looking at, and especially when we're looking at these PEO1 businesses, usually there's more than one cloud hanging on top of the business. There are many clouds. And also, there are always a lot of macro clouds. And also, even if there are no macro clouds, there are macro concerns. And what we need to do is we need to be like Arjuna. We need to focus on the business and only the business. And so to figure out the future of an economy is really hard. For me to figure out the future of even state of California is very hard. Or even the county I live in, just kind of what's going to happen. So those are really difficult questions. So we have to simplify the world. And one of the ways to simplify it is to be like Arjuna. You focus on the business and you don't focus on the noise. And one of the things I noticed when I was in Istanbul the last few days is there's a lot of noise. And if one can get past the noise and focus on the business and just consider the nuances of the business, things can become quite clear and quite obvious. So I did find a few things that I think we will pull the trigger on. But if I were to if I were to look at those, the macro situation of the country, or even the headwinds that the businesses are facing, there are significant headwinds. But if I'm buying at 20% of liquidation value, or at such a small fraction of future earnings, that and like I said, these are fantastic assets. So focusing on the center of the eye of the fish is the name of the game. That's what we need to do. So do not get yourself distracted by looking at all kinds of macro things. I think you're best off ignoring all of them, because anyway you can't predict them. Then commandment number 8 is thou shalt never short a stock. So I don't think we need to spend much time here, but that's pretty obvious, is we don't need to figure out what's going to happen to Tesla. That's, we don't need to go long and we don't need to go short. That just falls in the too hard pile. And so, like Tesla, for me, the stock, not the car, is there for pure entertainment purposes. Just to watch from the front row seats as opposed to being in the arena. So we just don't need to figure out exactly what's going to happen, and we don't need to go. So first of all, commandment number 3 is you're going to be wrong 1/3 of the time. I think with shorting, you're going to be wrong like 80% of the time. So both Buffett and Munger say that they've always been right on the stocks that they thought ought to be shorted, but they were always wrong on the timing. And the timing can get very painful. Also, the math is against you, because the maximum you can make if you're right in a short position is a double. And we're not going for doubles. And the maximum you can lose is you can go bankrupt. So there's no point making bets where the highest upside is a double and the highest downside is that you're out of the game. So I shall go to my grave without ever having shorted a stock, and I think you should do the same. And then, commandment number 9 comes from Polonius. And even though Polonius came long after Moses did, he was the character in Hamlet. And Polonius said to his son, neither a lender nor a borrower be. And so I think Buffett's tweak on Polonius is neither a long-term lender nor a short-term borrower be. So basically, you don't want to introduce leverage into your life. I think that to finish first, you have to first finish, and we want to make sure that we get to play the game, and we get to play the game for a long time. So the key is to spend less than we earn, and put that difference in a compounding engine. If you're spending more than you're earning, then it's not a good thing. And I have a blog. Some of you might have visited the blog, but I'll put an ad in for my blog here. My blog is called Chai with Pabrai, and so if you ever feel like having a cup of tea with me, you can go to my blog. And one of the first posts I made in fact, one of the impetus to set up the blog was a guy named Mr. Money Mustache. Some of you, maybe you can raise your hands. How many of you have heard of Mr. Money Mustache? Just raise your hand if you ever heard of him. We have a few enlightened humans in the room, which is great. So Mr. Money Mustache is a good person that you should get familiar with. I always expect that I'm going to hear that Mr. Money Mustache got divorced because his wife can't deal with him. But I think he married Mrs. Money Mustache. And so I think she's even more gung-ho about his methods than he is. Uh, but anyway, Mr. Money Mustache, I think he's in his early 30s now. But he, at 22, he was a software engineer, and he decided that he was going to be retired at the age of 30. And he was going to be retired at the age of 30, not because he got some exit from some company, but he would retire at 30 being a software engineer, having just made a normal software engineer salary for 8 years. So he ran his life for 8 years. I mean, like, for example, Mr. Money Mustache would not be caught dead in a Starbucks. I mean, paying $4 for a coffee ain't happening. He's like more like 5 cents for a coffee. Um, so I think he had like a 60% or 70% savings rate. Uh, so he has a car, but I think he consumes about 2 gallons of gas a year um, on in that car, and his bike gets a lot of mileage. He's bikes everywhere, and he's a carpenter. I think he built most of his own house somewhere in the woods of Colorado, and anyway, I think it's worth going to his blog. I think you might have some difficulty with some of his methods, but if you even follow one third of what he does, you'll be on a great path. So he carefully looked at every expense us humans have. He decided that the way the economy is set up, which is we take a bunch of loans when we get jobs, which is we buy a fancy car and have a loan and buy a fancy house or have high rent and all that. That was all for the birds. He wasn't doing that. He took no debt. He drove a beater, I think, and basically he just looked at every line item that he had expenses with, and nothing was going to be spent. So anyway, and of course, now the funny thing is, Mr. Money Mustache, through his blog, makes several $100,000 a year because his blog is so popular, and he's a little disappointed about that. He's kind of sad about it because he didn't want to kind of be making all this money. He wanted to prove that he can, live the way he does. So he claims at least that all that money is going to charity. So maybe it is, which is great. But he's a great example to follow, and first story on my blog amongst many other good stories. And then finally, commandment number 10 is thou shalt be a shameless cloner. So cloning is very good for your health. It's just there are many smart people who are great investors. In many cases, their portfolios are visible to us because it's required by law. And it's a great shortcut to look at what are the highest conviction ideas of some very smart people. And we have websites like Dataroma, for example, in the US, which is tracking a bunch of investors and telling you what their highest conviction bets are. And so I think cloning can be really good for your health. And that's the 10th and final commandment. And with that, Arvind, we'll open up for questions. So thank you.
All right, Mohnish, that was great. Thank you. So I'm sure we'll jump into questions. So please have yours ready to go. I'll lob in one. The students have prepared after seeing as much as they could online about you and the videos and the books and reading. They've prepared many questions, but a common theme was just how you're sourcing ideas across, India, China, Korea, Japan, Turkey. How are you finding ideas? I don't know if you're looking at the equivalent of 13 apps of Turkish entrepreneur investors, or how are you finding these 1P ideas or 3P?
I think this was Ocean's 12, maybe it was Ocean's 13, the movie. I forget which oceans it was, but it was, I think, when Clooney is talking to Andy Garcia. Was that in Ocean's 13 or Ocean 12? Maybe, maybe it's Ocean's 13. But anyway, Clooney's trying to get his wife back, who's now with Andy Garcia. And anyway, he and Andy are having a talk, and Andy has some problem with some serious problem. Clooney tells him, "I know a guy," and then Andy tells him, like in disbelief, "I have all these serious problems, and you know a guy?" And he says, "Yeah, I know a guy." So what can I say? As far as Istanbul goes, I know a guy, and who shall go nameless for now. But no, I think the thing is that you know we would not be able to survive. I would not be able to survive if it weren't for commandment number 10. Cloning is really good for your health. So I think in India, I think in the last 2 years, I have met with about 100 and either met or visited about 180 or more businesses that are listed, and met with a lot of CEOs and teams, and visited a number of plants and headquarters and all of that. It's just been a great education, and and in some cases there was cloning. In some cases, it was just actually doing the work. God forbid, and but basically, we only need like 2 or 3 ideas in a year. We don't need too many. And I think if one is cloning is a good shortcut. One of the commandments that didn't make the top 10, but almost made it, was when Buffett was asked the same question, how do you find great stocks and all that, and his answer was start with the A's. And Buffett wasn't being facetious. In the 50s, he went through the Moody's manual, and he went through it twice, and there were 20,000 companies in there, and he looked at every single one of them. And I bought the Moody's manuals a few years back from on eBay, just to take a look at them, the 50s Moody's manuals. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, they've got like 3 or 4 companies a page, and they've got the basic financial information on those companies. And you can very quickly get to see kind of what is going on in terms of, cash and cash flows and all of that. And in many cases, he was buying well below cash. Forget the earnings engine; he was just buying below cash, and such. But he had to go through a number of, thousands of pages to get to them. But that was fine. He had the time to do it. And so I think that this is a treasure hunt, and if you enjoy treasure hunts, you'll enjoy being an investor. And there are shortcuts in the treasure hunt, like being a cloner. But it works. I think so. Generally speaking, when I've gone to geographies like South Korea or now Turkey or China, I've definitely employed cloning to get some cover, and that has worked well. And in the case of India, it's been a lot of kind of looking at things directly, but many times in India we find parallels that have very strong histories in the US or Europe, and so then we can look at those. I mean, the same type of business exists in these countries and has been existed for longer, so you can kind of look at the trajectory that some of these businesses have followed and then take it from there.
Wants to ask a question. Yeah, please.
Thank you for having
Speak
us.
up.
Thank you for having us. I hope you can hear me. I want to go back to one of the questions that I had with regards to temperament during the financial crisis. So you really talked about having a rope to get out of the well. How did you remain calm and confident so that you really pose that strong case for your investors?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that uh, my wife told me actually is after the financial crisis was that she never realized the degree to which our wealth had dropped, uh, and the degree to which I was, underwater and such. And she said she didn't really notice um, much change in my demeanor. Uh, and so I think the thing is that there's a quote that if wealth is lost, nothing is lost. If health is lost, something is lost. And if character is lost, everything is lost. And so we are only talking about wealth, which for the quote means nothing. And quite frankly, I think one needs to put things in perspective in terms of what is important in life. And another thing to keep in mind is that if you look at the United States, what is the percentage of people who are unable to make ends meet after having a good education, and in the sense that they are not able to pay rent, not able to pay for groceries and those sorts of things. um, it's a number that approaches zero. And so the bottom line is that we live in a country which has tremendous safety nets of a number of different kinds. And so the bottom line is that even if things don't work out, the odds are extremely high that you will be able to get back on track. You may have some period where you have to readjust, you may have to take a job instead of being on your own, that sort of thing. But the bottom line is that you will definitely be able to bounce back. And so I think it's always good to keep things in perspective about what is important in life. And I think when I was going through the financial crisis, I really didn't. Clearly the rope helped. Looking at Excel helped. But my take is that partially it may be that I had seen a lot of ups and downs in childhood, so that probably was somewhat helpful, just because I'd seen far more extremes than I was going through. And so, yeah, I think temperament is important. If you find yourself on that end of things, there is a form of Buddhist meditation called Vipassana. You can Google that, and you can do a 10-day retreat in India where you basically, for the most part, are silent and having an austere life. But that's worked for many people I know. I have a bunch of people who keep telling me that I ought to do it. I tell them, if you're already in Detroit, you don't need a bus to get there, and such. So, but there's a number of different ways and techniques of getting there. So I think that, but some of it is pre-wired. I think it might be temperament, but I think we can definitely. A tendency is not destiny. A tendency does not need to be destiny, and so we all as humans have tendencies, but we definitely also have free will and can get past those tendencies. So we can look at a number of different tools. The bottom line is that you have to figure out what rope works for you.
Mohnish, actually on that subject, you talked about the rope and the well and Excel on the professional front, and you mentioned the personal front too. Do you have a rope in that scenario?
I think that I don't know. Maybe it's just the way I'm wired, but yeah. I didn't need much more than Excel. Bottom line is I think what I when I was going through the financial crisis, one of the things that was really exciting was just the sheer number of investment opportunities. While your portfolio is crashing and burning, on the other hand, you're seeing all these, mouth-watering investment ideas and such. And I mean, I think, like, for example, I found, the whole commodity space just collapsed. And I was finding so many ideas of investing in commodities. And they were really, really simple ideas that I think every single one looked like at least a 5x. And so because I didn't have a lot of time to study them, I made a basket bet with a bunch of them. Not a single one was a loser. Almost every single one of them went up at least 4 or 5 times. I think one investment I made, Tech Cominco, which I sold after a 5x, went up to a 10x. So it was just, one of the things that was very attractive about that time was that there was a lot of investment ideas, and I was selling cheap stocks to buy cheaper stocks. So that's one of the things I did. I used that period to make I tried to widen as much as I could the discount to intrinsic value by doing that. But on the personal side, I think at the bottom of the financial crisis, my net worth, I think, was down to 18 million. There are worse problems in life than having a net worth of 18 million. So I didn't have too many issues with that. Of course, if I looked at, peak to bottom, it was a huge drop. I think peak had been somewhere, I think I'd paid tax and all, but somewhere around north of 80 million. So if I looked at it from peak to bottom, it was a significant drop. But my take was that things looked really cheap. I liked what we owned. I think that I didn't have any leverage, and I really didn't see any reason to get. I mean, I'd seen with my dad, right, that you basically keep your senses about you and just keep chopping wood and move ahead, and that's an important thing to do.
I didn't want to cut you off, but that wasn't exactly the question I was asking. I was asking, outside of investing, when you need a rope and you're in a well, like out in your personal life or in other.
I think the exact same thing applies. You just need a different rope.
Right.
So I think we have to understand that present circumstances never last. If you're having a really good time in life, that's probably not going to last.
Right.
And if you're having a really bad time in life, that's also not going to last. So one is you have to have confidence that when you're at the absolute bottom in life, that it is going to get better. It's just the nature of life. It's going to get better. And so once you have that basic confidence that life changes, I mean, we have this, number of people kill themselves, right? I mean, we have suicide where people just take their lives and such. I was reading somewhere that I don't know if I got the numbers right, but there've been like more than 1,000 people who've jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and I think there are like something like 30 of them who survived, who didn't die, and those 30. 100% of them regret the decision to jump. Okay, so basically if we have a sample size of 30 out of, I mean, we can't talk to the people who jumped and actually died, but we do have these few people who came back from the dead, if you will. And if 100% of people who came back from the dead are saying it was a big mistake to do it, probably the odds are that if we could talk to all 1,000 plus of them, the overwhelming number would say it was a mistake. And so then why did they jump? Well, I think they jumped because at that point they were at the bottom of a well without a rope, right? So that's a very sad situation. But they, for whatever reason, did not have the confidence, and this is why a certain percentage of humans, a large number of humans attempt suicide. A relatively small number are successful. Thankfully, that's one thing good about not a large number are successful. Uh, but but I think people get to bottoms and don't know how to get out of the bottoms, right? And and I think that the only thing I can say is that one has to have faith that tomorrow will be better than today, and that whatever circumstances we are facing are not permanent. And once we have, so finding it could be finding Buddhism, it could be finding a friend, it could be finding a loved one to talk to, it could be there are 100 different kinds of ropes one can have. I mean, I think in the case of a large number of people, their spouses are going to be the rope. You know, many times when I have issues, which I'm just kind of concerned about whatever else, I'll just talk to my wife about it, and almost always I'm feeling a lot better after that talk. So so I think we can always find the people around us. Uh, I think definitely if you reach out to friends and family when you are at the bottom of the well, it is only going to help you.
That was a helpful perspective. Thank you. So, other questions? Please, yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Mohnish. I was wondering, back to the investments, if you could talk about your stake that you took in Google a few years ago, kind of through the prism of what you told us today, what brought you to it, and then why you pulled it up.
Yeah, I think Google is a very interesting company because Google is a company that can make its revenues and its cash flows whatever it wants it to be. Um, uh, Very few companies are in that circumstance. So the overwhelming majority of the products and services that Google provides to us, it provides to us at no cost. I mean, it doesn't even monetize those products. It just provides it without monetization. And they can turn on monetization engines on a variety of products at will, I think. In fact, the history of the company is really interesting because I find it really interesting that this is a company that when it was founded, uh, the founders had no revenue model. They had no idea how Google would ever make money. Surprisingly, the investors who invested also didn't understand how this thing would make money, and they still invested in the company. And eventually, the revenue model was not even figured out by the founders. It was figured out by one of the guys they'd hired, and this guy was not hired to figure out the revenue model. He was he was told after I think a few months or maybe a year or so on the job, oh, by the way, can you figure out how we can make money? And he went off to figure it out, and we he came back with AdWords, you know, and they were off to the races. So AdWords, which is responsible for a large portion of Google's revenues today, was not understood as a way to monetize by the founders when they founded the company or even after that. So similarly, I mean, if you look at like when they bought Waze, the Israeli company that all of us use, um, there was no revenue model. Waze was just providing directions without, and they when Google bought it, and even for a while when they ran it for free. It was actually a loss because they had no monetization. And now, of course, you see all the ads on Waze. and they figured. So I think Google is a very interesting company because I think they have a lot of flexibility in terms of what engines to turn on and and how to monetize and what to monetize and so on. They've got a lot of brain power to do it. So I really liked the business when I bought it. I think when I bought it, it was relatively modest in multiple. I think the forward earnings was in the teens, which for me is like blasphemy to invest in something trading in the teens. Uh, but even I got past that, and and it worked. I think in about 3 years we had more than doubled our money, and I had actually intended that this is such a great business that I'll just keep it. I'll just keep it forever. But then I had these PEO ones show up, and I needed cash, and you know, as hard as it was, Google was history. I mean, once you have PEO ones, a lot of things are going to be history. So I think Google will continue to do well. I hope they don't prove me wrong in terms of like whether the PEO ones. I think the PEO ones will beat what Google does over the next several years. But no, it's a great company, and I think it has a great future.
So thank you for speaking with us. When you think about investing in India, you usually, like you started talking to management. So how do you judge whether the management is good or whether they're crooks or like incompetent?
Yeah, that's a good question. So historically, I never met management. For most of my career as an investor, probably out of the last, if you take the last 24 years, including the time when I was just managed my own money, probably at least 20 of those years or 21, 22 of those years, I never met managements, and things worked out fine. I didn't think I could do that in India because I think that one of the things I can almost bet on is that the typical US company I might look at, if I lose money, it won't be because of fraud. I can lose money because of my stupidity, but not because of fraud. So the outright fraud cases in the US in public markets are few and far between. So they're not, at least in my almost quarter century of investing, I've never lost money, I think, anywhere because of fraud. I've lost money many times because of stupidity, but not because of fraud. So in India, I think there's a much higher risk of fraud than there is in the US. So I needed to be able to kick the tires. So far, I don't think we've invested in anything that is fraudulent. So I think so far the filter has worked, but we will find out over time. But I think, generally speaking, one is, you can make plenty of judgments when you meet managements. I mean, I have been in the room with frauds in India. That's kind of fun. In fact, I think it's been a lot of great learning to be in the room with frauds because you get to try to understand kind of how they work. But the other thing is that you can follow the cash. So I think one of the best ways to avoid fraud. So there's a great book which I think a new edition just came out called Financial Shenanigans. I think Schlitt is the guy's name. I'm in touch with the author now. I'm supposed to have a call with him in the next few weeks, so I'm looking forward to that. I think Howard Schlitt is his name, but I'm not sure. But anyway, that's a great book. I think it does a really good job of explaining how companies can mess with you with their accounting and financial statements. And I think in India, one of the things I look for is just follow the cash. I think if you follow the cash, I mean, if you look at even in the US, if you look at something like MCI, WorldCom, which was a fraud, it would have been easy to spot if you focused on the cash, because basically they were converting expenses into capex. So what were ordinary expenses were being capitalized, and thus profits were being increased. But if you looked for the cash, what is the business producing at the end of the year after all expenses? You would just see that it was a widely different number from net income for WorldCom, for example. So I think the Financial Shenanigans book, the guy is really good, and I think that you can tell a lot with just the numbers and the whether the cash is there or not. In some cases we have fraud in India, like I think Satyam is a good example, where the guy doctored the bank statements. So in that case, I think Deloitte was the auditor. In that particular case, you wouldn't have caught it because the cash was a fiction. What they were showing as cash on the balance sheet didn't exist. But that's a very rare case, and but generally you'll find that the fraudulent guys basically one way or another are playing with debt, and they're kind of you can get to it if you just sift through the financials.
So you talked in your previous video about BF Chrysler being one of the candidates of the multi-bagger in your list. That is the company it's a good business run by a good CEO, but the CEO was passed away like not too long ago. So should you cross it off the list?
Yeah, so it was very sad that Sergio Marchionne passed away. Great guy. In fact, I just went to his memorial service in Detroit last week, and I would say this, that Sergio was probably, in my opinion, amongst the top 20 business leaders to come along in the last 100 years, amongst public companies globally. And he was and I think we will see some books and such come out about him in the next few years, but he was an extremely unusual leader. And I think Fiat Chrysler in 2009 was going to be liquidated. It was very close to being liquidated. In fact, the decision by the U.S. government not to liquidate it was like won by a 3-2 vote by the Auto Task Force. So it barely avoided liquidation because they pretty much had given up on the business. They didn't think the business could be resurrected. And Sergio, I think without Sergio on the scene, I'm not sure it would make it. I'm not sure Chrysler would have made it. But the thing is that what has happened with Fiat Chrysler since then is not only have they proven that they should not have been liquidated, they are now outperforming the other two rivals. So Fiat Chrysler has now got best-in-class margins, higher than GM and higher than Ford, coming from a distant third, getting to basically number one. So I think that if you look at a leader like Sergio, I knew Sergio was a very good leader in 2012 before we invested, but I went through about 4 different recalibrations of Sergio. Each time when I recalibrated him, it was at a much higher level than the last time. I thought he was great, and then he was even greater and just kept going. And the last recalibration that happened with him, for me, happened after his death. So Sergio knew a year ago, in July 2017, that he was in serious problems with his health and possibly terminal. He knew that a year before he died. Never told anyone, just his family, immediate family knew. And this is a guy who had a net worth of several hundred million, 15 Ferraris or something. And he decided he's going to spend the last year of his life running Fiat Chrysler full out to hit the 2018 plan. And that's what he did. He basically ran 1,000,000 miles an hour in his last 12 months to push the company to where it needed to be. And one of the things he did before he passed away was that he set the plan for 2022. So that Fiat has published guidance and numbers for 2022 on June 1st of 2018. So about 4 weeks before he left the scene at Fiat and about 7 weeks before he passed away, he published the blueprint. And I found it strange when he published that, because he was publishing it a year before he was actually going to leave the company, and a year before the next guy was going to be named. So if he was anyway going to leave the company in 2019, if he had just left the company in 2019 and retired and so on, I think Fiat Chrysler would still execute and make the 2022 numbers. But he didn't leave the scene, and he didn't just pass away. He actually martyred himself. And the management team, he had about 35 direct reports, and they used to spend weekends together, because they didn't want to spend weekday time on meetings, architecting the future of the company. I met some of these people in Detroit. I think Mike Manley, who's now the CEO, Mike Manley is not running the company for financial benefit, personally or whatever. He is on a crusade. And he's on a crusade to keep Sergio's legacy alive. He cannot screw it up. And he can't screw it up, and the 20, 30 other people around him can't screw it up. Because what I knew before I went to Detroit, and what I saw there is GM and Ford just don't have anything like this. These are people on an intense mission, and they are going to execute on that mission. Nothing's going to stop them. So they published their 2022 numbers. It's sitting at a P of 2 on 2022 numbers. I think we're going to just let it ride. In fact, I think the P of 2 is understated. It's probably closer to P of 1.5 or 1.3 or something, because it's heavily sandbagged. So anyway, I think the company is in a very different shape than it was in 2009 when Sergio came in, and it's not a commodity company. They have got rid of almost every commodity product. Jeep is about 2 million units a year, a very unique positioning. They pretty much killed every single car or product they made that was a Me Too product. They have no Me Too products in their lineup.
Any questions? Yeah, please, go for it.
You recently mentioned that you were looking to invest in Turkey. I was wondering how you think about currency depreciation in markets like that.
Arvind, maybe you can repeat that. I couldn't tell.
Sure. You talk a lot about investing in Turkey and in other foreign economies, non-U.S. economies. How do you think about currency risk? Is that a fair?
I'm sorry, how do I think about what?
Currency risk.
Oh, yeah, so it's irrelevant. Basically, the bottom line is that if you are right on the business, the currency is not going to matter. My first investment in India, which I made personally in '94, basically went up like 150x in 5 or 6 years. The currency moved like 30% against me, 30 or 40% against me in that period. It was irrelevant. And I think even now when we're investing at these PE1 type situations, I think the currency is well, in some cases we are actually investing in assets that actually have an international value, and so I'm not really concerned. I mean, I'll give you an example. I probably won't make an investment in this company, but one of the things I found unusual about Turkey was so I visited a cement company in Turkey, and cement is an industry where you are very tied in geographically. Transportation cost of cement is very high relative to production cost. So basically, a cement plant typically starts to get non-competitive once you are getting to be 100 or 200 kilometers or miles away from the plant. So it tends to be very geographically. So once you're about 200 miles away, another plant is going to typically have some advantage over you because the transport cost starts eating in. And so most cement plants are geographically constrained. They can only supply within a region and be competitive. So when I visited this company, I noticed that they had a small percentage, but a percentage of exports. And I'd never seen a cement company exporting cement. So I was kind of confused by that. One of the things the thing about this industry is that all knowledge is cumulative, and I have met with about at least 10 cement companies in India. And one of the 10 CFOs I met, who I like a lot, just told me, this is a shit business. Don't invest in it. And let me explain why you don't want to invest in it. He instantly became my friend. And he ran through the numbers and explained why I should never invest in the business. And anyway, I had already gotten to similar conclusions, but not with his precision. So before I even went into I go into these meetings like this cement company. I tried to even cancel the meeting because I said, listen, this is going to be a waste of time. I'm just never going to invest in cement. And but the meeting was already set, so whatever. So so I said, okay, what I always find with these things, I think it's going to be like a wasted hour. But it turned out to be like an incredible. Every time I'm always wrong when I'm thinking that this is a useless business or whatever else. There's no point. It ends up being a great hour of business school. And this was another great hour of business school. So I'm talking to the company. I said, listen, I'm noticing you got like this, relatively small percentage, but like, 8-9% of your volumes are being exported. So, I'm the village idiot. You can't run cement. You can't transport cement very far. Can you explain what's going on here? Like, how can you get to actually exporting? So the CFO says that our plants are sitting on the coast, and we have a dedicated port. And I didn't realize, but Turkey has incredible advantage on production of cement. And I think it must be because, and I still haven't figured all of this out, but I think that three big ingredients are limestone, cheap coal, and cheap energy. Those are the three things you need to make cheap cement. And they have all three of these are cheap. I think I have to research the limestone, but definitely the coal deposits. Turkey has no petroleum, it has a lot of coal, and the power rates are very low. So their cost of production of cement is very low in Turkey, and they are able to take that cement, put it on a ship, and get it to the east coast of the U.S. and get it into the Horn of Africa, and not on the Horn, I'm sorry, on the other side, on the west coast of Africa. And in both cases, they're very competitive. And of course, when they get into the east coast, they can't go very far. But just the way geography is in the U.S., we have high population density on the east coast. So once you're at the port, you don't need to transport very far to get to humans who need cement. And basically, when he explained the economics, so I told him, listen, the devaluation makes you even more competitive. And so the CFO explained that their domestic cement business, he said, listen, don't look at our numbers in the past. I'm just telling you, they're going to be terrible in the future. Okay? Because he says the brunt of the financial crisis has not shown up into our numbers yet. I said, I'm so grateful for that candor. Thank you so much. But he said, look, what's going to happen is that by 10% or 9% of volume that's being shipped, it'll take me some time, but I will get to 50% being shipped, being exported. Because I was competitive before, but I am way more competitive now because of the exchange rate. And so this is an interesting business in the sense that it's almost as if the currency doesn't matter so much, because if the currency drops further, he'll go to 70% exports eventually and such. And the other thing is, the currency goes the other way, it probably is because the economy is getting better. So his domestic volumes start increasing. So I just found it interesting that, the only other company that I know of like this is POSCO in South Korea. It used to always be that you couldn't really have a steel industry unless you had iron ore in country. And both Japan and South Korea proved that you could just bring it in and ship it out. And so POSCO, if you look at it in South Korea, their port infrastructure, one of the most advanced in the world. It's like in a U, where the ships that drop off the ore are the same ships that pick up the finished product in just a U-turn. Very efficient logistics. And so POSCO was able to bring all the resources in they needed to make steel and ship them all out and still be super competitive. And all of this works very well because ocean shipping has become super cheap over the years. So there's a great book you guys might enjoy. It's called The Box. I think Mark Levinson is the name of the author. And it talks about the whole incredible transformation we saw because of the container. We don't pay attention to containers, but container shipping transformed shipping. And then I'm reading another book which is even funnier in the same vein. I think it's called 90% of Everything. I think that's what it's called. But this lady goes on these container ships, this journalist, and she's kind of, explaining the industry while being a passenger. And she has a lot of funny experiences on these ships, and her writing style is quite funny. So that's another great book, which is kind of a mix of entertainment and education. So 90% of Everything, I think, is that name. But that's another great book. But anyway, so I think one of the things to understand about ocean shipping is, for practical purposes, ocean shipping is nearly free. I can get from Turkey to the U.S. cheaper than I can get 150 miles inland into Turkey. So it's the quirk of ocean shipping. So anyway, hope that answers it.
Manish, thank you for taking time to talk this. In your book, you discuss investing in distressed businesses in distressed industries. Can you talk about what sets up for a good turnaround story?
I'm sorry, Arvind, I didn't get the second part of the question.
The last part was what groundwork is required for a good turnaround story in a great company?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, you don't want to bet on turnarounds. I think most turnarounds don't work. Turnarounds don't turnarounds, if you will. So I think generally those are not good bets. I think, like for example, when I invested in the auto industry in Fiat Chrysler, the industry was distressed, but there had been structural changes to the industry which made the recovery uh, almost for sure. So I think you don't want to be investing where you are making heroic assumptions about magic that management's going to do. I think that's not a good idea. But I think you can make investments where basically you're basically you can see the tread marks to where this is going and where it's going to end up. So I think that industries do get distressed, even countries that get distressed, like Turkey. But like for example, if I looked at this cement business, I can see how they've got flexibility where, I mean, actually what's happening in Turkey, the exporters are doing great. And the other thing I noticed is that the local prices have not adjusted as much. I mean, what has adjusted immediately has been the imports. Those have adjusted, but things that are produced locally, they haven't fully adjusted yet. So the exports are going to have a stronger advantage with a weaker currency. And so you want to see obvious things when you're going into these areas. You don't want to make heroic assumptions about what management is going to do or what's going to change. It should already be in place, but it's just that the market is missing it.
Have you ever invested in a business that have a competitive moat, which turn out to be illusional, and what have you learned from the investment?
I didn't fully get that. Competitors who have what?
Competitive moats that
Yeah.
turn out to be illusional.
Competitive modes that turn out where the mode turns out to be an illusion ultimately.
I'm saying the moat turns out to be what?
An illusion.
Yeah. Well, that is very common. We're mostly dealing with illusions as far as moats go. So, I mean, I think the nature of capitalism is that capitalism is creative destruction, and there used to be only one company that was in the Dow about 90 years ago, that was in the Dow today. That was GE, and the one company is gone now. And like what I just saw in the paper is their new CEO has been unceremoniously been removed. So I mean, GE was a pretty formidable company, and I think still in aircraft engines, etc., they have a pretty formidable moat. But you can see that even a company like GE basically is having a lot of difficulties. And so I think moats get filled in far more frequently and far more quickly than most of us would think they should get filled in. And so your defense against that is the PE of 1. So that's the only way to protect yourself. So the PE of 1s are good for your health because you take your cash out after the first year, or maybe after a couple of years, and then you don't particularly care. One of the things that I've been doing for the last few months is I set up this waterproof Bluetooth speaker in my shower, and I listen to the Buffett and Munger annual meeting videos because they posted all the videos from '94 till last year on the I think the CNBC website, buffett.cnbc.com, and so I think now I'm at year 2001. I get through about half an hour a day, which is great. It's actually Sometimes it's the most productive half hour of the day, I find. But one of the things Buffett was mentioning, I think in the late 90s, he was saying that, I think this was in right at when the dot-com bubble was peaking, maybe it was the year 2000 or 99, I think 99. Basically, he was saying that if you looked for companies that are making more than 200 million after tax in the United States, and this is, let's say, in the year 2000, there's like 400 of them. 400 companies in the US in around 2000 were making over 200 million after tax a year. And he said that the US at the time had been around for like 225 years or 224 years. And in 224 years of open capitalism with millions of companies, you ended up with just 400 companies that got to enough success to make 200 million a year. And I recently ran that number for today. So I said, let's change the 200 to like 500 because, you know, there's been all these years of inflation and expenses and all of that. And the number of companies today that make more than 500 million a year in the US is less than 500. And so the thing is that between 2000 and 2018, a huge number of businesses got formed, and there were a lot of businesses that were emerging at that time as well. And one of the reasons Buffett made that point was that he said that these companies making 200 million basically deserve, if they were going to continue making that money, probably deserved a market cap over 3 billion. You know, if you give it a 15 multiple or something. But the number of companies making over three, I mean, at that time, with a market cap over 3 billion, was many times that number. Was in the thousands. And part of it was at that time we had the dot-com bubble going on. I think he wanted to prove the point that a huge number of these companies are going to disappoint because they're not going to end up with those. They're never going to produce the 200 million to justify the 3 billion. And so even today, 18 more years have passed, and we've had all this tech and everything else that's happened, and the cloud, and you know, all these things that have happened, and those numbers haven't changed that much. And so the bottom line is that if you're investing, betting on the future of these companies growing a lot, you have to look at the other side, that not that many make it over the fence. And so the mortality rate is pretty high. And so there are 2 or 3 lessons from that. One is stick with the small and nano caps. Okay, because a lot of companies are basically in capitalism never going to get to 200 million or 400 million or 500 million. They're just never going to get there. They have a higher chance of getting to 10 million, 15 million, 20 million or something. That's a lot easier than 200 or 400 million. And the second is, you know, take care of commandment number 4, focus on the PE of ones. So I think moats, you have to approach moats with a jaundiced eye. I mean, if I go back to this company in Turkey, the cement company, so one of the issues that comes up in cement, and one of the reasons why it's such a terrible business in India, is there are limited barriers to entry. I mean, there are some barriers in the sense that in India, the limestone deposits are only in certain parts of the country. Access to coal also is a little bit, you know, it's not a given that you may have access to cheap coal or cheap power. But a lot of people can get past those 3 variables. And they'll definitely get past those 3 variables if you're making a lot of money. So even in Turkey, this company, I mean, the thing I have to think about is if they really get into great times. I mean, today I think the thing is the replacement cost at which I questioned the CFO on, the replacement cost makes it prohibitive for them to put up new capacity. But at some point, if the numbers change, then I'm not sure how strong those barriers are. They may be enduring for a while, or they may not. I just don't know right now. So I think the thing is that you have to recognize that people are constantly looking. It's just the nature of capitalism to destroy your moat. They're just constantly looking to destroy your moat. And so what you really want to look for, and there are very few enduring moats. So you have to really look far and wide. One of the interesting things about these enduring moats is many times the market doesn't price them any higher than the non-enduring moats. Sometimes market can't distinguish between enduring and non-enduring. And so if you can really identify an enduring moat, which are very few, and get into those, then life can be really good. But I think the P of one is your protection against the illusional moats, if you will.
So in your book, like you talk about the Kelly formula, and I understand Kelly formula requires expected value in odds. So how do you approach to estimate odds?
I didn't get that fully. Maybe Arvind, can you repeat that?
Sure. Hiroki asked in your book, you talk about the Kelly formula, and that mandates having a view on the odds of the outcome. And so how do you get to the odds?
Yeah, so the Kelly formula discussion in my book was a mistake. If I had to rewrite it or come out with another edition, I would just skip that entire, I would not mention Kelly. And the reason I wouldn't mention Kelly is that the mistake I made was that Kelly really only works if you get to make the same bet 1,000 times. And we don't get to make the same bet 1,000 times in the stock market. So if you had heads was 51% odds, tails was 49%, and you get to bet 1,000 times and you bet heads every time, and the payoff is 2-1, you want to make that bet as heads every time. And over time you do well. But if you only get that chance twice, and it's 51-49, it doesn't make that much sense, and the outcomes could be all over the place. So I think Kelly is not useful for what we try to do.
Thank you, Mohnish. Apologies for asking a question in a different direction. But we all agree that we should invest in something that we understand. But you went one step ahead once and quoted that you don't understand 99% of the businesses, that's 98, and combining that with the P's of one, looking into that direction specifically. So I find these things really interesting, how you look at them. So is that one of the reasons why you look globally, trying to find mispriced opportunities in those specific businesses? And do you find some challenges in that approach as well? And how do you go about learning into new industry?
I think I got most of that, Arvind, but can you just repeat just for clarity?
I think I can struggle to a certain extent, but I think part of it is, how do you increase your circle of competence while looking globally, while looking for a PE of 1?
Yeah, so I think first of all, circle of competence was not in the commandments because maybe it should be, but it's the baseline. So the first filter has to be circle of competence. So if something is not in your circle of competence, it just shouldn't be, it should immediately be dropped from consideration, regardless of the price. So we have to stick to our circle of competence. I think once we find that something's within our circle of competence, then we can look at the PEO ones and all of that and take it from there. Sometimes the PEO ones make it easy to get something into circle of competence because, I mean, like if I go back to the IPSCO example, that the next 2 years' earnings will, plus the cash will equal the market cap. Basically, what I needed to do was to handicap the odds of that actually being true. Just that statement. I didn't really need to understand the business that much beyond that because there was no debt. And if this was true, then any fool could see that I still have the plants, I still have the management, I still have all the other pieces, and the odds are high that it probably will make some money in the future. So in that case, I didn't need to really, get into the weeds of figuring out exactly how strong or weak their moat was and whatever else, because I needed to spend a lot of energy on the resilience of the 2-year cash flows more than anything else. So I think if you get to these very low price stocks, it can make your life a lot easier. I mean, like I looked at some companies in Turkey where I can look at at a sliver of their assets, and the sliver of their assets exceeds the market cap, and there's a lot more assets. So I actually, looked at some of those assets, and so the thing is, I didn't really need to have a view on every thing that they own. I just need to have a view that they own enough that there's a lot of downside protection. And so I think the thing is you first have to, the first filter is circle of competence. And then after that, you get into all these low price PO1 and all that. And I agree with you that when you start applying all these filters, there's not much left. And Munger's response to that is, why should it be easy to get rich?
So speaking of shameless cloning, I guess, are there any kind of companies that you're particularly excited about right now? And I guess, would you be willing to share any and walk us through kind of how you think about that?
Did I hear a call for stock tips? Is that right, Arvind?
I think so.
Well, we're gonna duck that question, but I would just say this, that you can look at my holdings on Dataroma. I think the only one that shows up now is Fiat Chrysler because the only U.S. listed company that we own, and that should be enough to get you to be quite rich.
Will, did you have that? Yeah.
So you previously described your performance-only fee structure as a competitive moat. Are you finding that as the rise in index investing has driven other asset managers' fees downwards, do you feel like that moat is being eroded somewhat?
Yeah, no, that moat is as close to a permanent moat as you can get. So, the thing is that what I have done is that clearly the 0625 fee structure is a fee structure that is very favorable for investors. And it's favorable to investors for a couple of reasons. One is that it takes away any incentives for me to be just an asset gathering machine, because I don't get paid more if I have more assets. I get paid if I perform. And the second thing is that, I just went through a 10-year period. I told you that in 2009, I was at the bottom of a very deep well, and we were down 70%. And then every year, the bar was moving by 6%. And we finally crossed the high watermark, including the 6% in 2017. So I went from 2007 to 2017 living on fresh air and water. And I survived on fresh air and water. It wasn't paid some very healthy fees. So happy days are here again. And but the thing is that some of my investors, when they came to me because they were enlightened about this fee structure being important. But what I have done, what I do once they become investors, is I start brainwashing them. And over the years, they become completely brainwashed. And like after a few years of my brainwashing, they are not interested in putting money with managers who don't have this fee structure. So then they'll come to me and say, Mohnish, I'm very happy having you as a manager. I have some more money. I want to put this with another manager, but they need to have this fee structure. Can you recommend someone? And I tell them, John, I'm so sorry, but there's no one else. But keep looking. Maybe I don't know, and you can find them. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of them basically, even if they put money with other managers, they are not happy about the fee structure, and they're reluctant to put the money. So I think that from a Pabrai Fund's perspective, that moat is as relevant today as it ever was, because for a sliver of humans, and I think an increasing sliver of humans, that fee structure is very important. And so I think that what I find very instructive is that I can't tell you how many people I know, young, smart investment analysts who become managers, who set up their own fund. And I always tell them all, listen, go with a zero fee. Okay, don't mess with that. And almost 100% of them violate commandment number 1. So, like, I met a manager recently, and he's got 6 or 7 million under management. He just started. And I told him, I said, I told you to go zero fee, and you didn't go zero fee. And so he says, yeah, but Mohnish, I need the money. So I said, the money is 70,000 pre-tax. And you have to have some savings. Otherwise, if you haven't done well in the investment business, you shouldn't be in the investment business, managing other people's money when you haven't done well for yourself. He says, yeah, I have a few years of runway if I don't get fees, but I want to increase the buffer. And so I said, no, that's not good. You take the fee away and you focus on, I said at your 6 million, 7 million, you should be banging out 50% a year or 40% a year, because there's a huge universe of opportunities you have that I don't have. And so I said at 40% a year, you don't even need other people's money. Just on your own money, you'll get rich. But all of these sermons fall on deaf ears. So hence, I have decided to put them in commandment form. And I'm hoping there is behavior change, but my history tells me there won't be behavior change.
Good question.
When you're sourcing investments, do you look at final goods and then go up the value chain to find companies that might have oligopoly or monopoly power within that certain sector of the value chain?
Yeah, I think that's it's always very good. I mean, you really want, like I said, capitalism is brutal. You really want protected moats. So I think that I have what you would call I call it a barbell portfolio. I think like about 55% of the portfolio, which is all-time high, is these PEO ones. Then there's about 10% cash, and then about another 45% is what I call these enduring moats. I mean, so in some cases, I paid up a lot more than PEO one because the moat was so strong. But it has to be a really strong moat to pay up. So, like for example, India has 3 credit rating agencies. After the funeral business, the next business that probably is extremely resilient, but it's very hard to develop the moat, is credit rating agencies. So if you look at the U.S. with Moody's and S&P, and the financial crisis is a very instructive thing to look at. These guys, one can argue, caused the financial crisis because without their AAA ratings, you wouldn't have had nearly as much damage as we had. So they precipitated and compounded the bubble and the damage, and they were called to task. There were hearings. There were all kinds of demands for heads to roll, and both Moody's and S&P paid very modest fines. Nobody went to prison, and life goes on. So even after nearly bringing Western civilization to its knees, they continue to endure and thrive. What a beautiful business. The other thing about the business is it has no capex. I mean, the funeral business, you actually got to buy land and hold it and all this stuff. Here you hire an MBA, give them a desk and a computer, and maybe your all-in cost is, I don't know, 200,000 or something. And that person may generate fees that may be several $1 million a year. And so, like in India, these rating agencies, they collect about 10 basis points, typically. Sometimes they collect less on the instruments they rate. And then they collect surveillance fees. So the revenues and costs have no correlation with each other. The 60% plus margin business. And there's no history of these enduring guys going out of business even after they screw up really badly. I mean, the one thing they're paid for is to give accurate ratings. And so one of the 3 rating agencies in India, we now own 10%, which is the maximum I can own. I paid more than a PEO one, but they've got good growth engines, and we'll just keep it for a long time.
Just kind of on that note, I'm curious, what does your normal decision calculus look like when you decide whether to sell an investment that you've held, other than opportunity cost for switching into new investments? Like for the one you just described, then what price would it have to go to for you to say, I'm out of this even if I don't have an alternative to put the money in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so. Let me give you an example of why buy and hold is not such a good idea. So, from 1988 to 2000, the Berkshire investment in Coca-Cola, which both Arvind and I are enjoying. Cheers, Arvind. And basically, they put about $1 billion into Coke, and I'm going to exclude dividends just to keep it simple. But the billion in 12 years went to 12 billion, approximately. So Berkshire got about a 12x return from 1988 to 2000 on the Coke investment, kind of mid-20s per year return, very nice. And then from 2000 to 2018, it went up from from 12 billion to about 18 billion. So in 18 years, it went up 50%, about 2.3% a year. So they made about 25% a year in the first 12 years, and they made less than about, well, including dividends, maybe they made 3.5% a year. Clearly, and there are almost no moats. In fact, I would say there probably is no moat that is more resilient than the Coke moat. It's kind of like the ultimate moat. And so here you have two guys who are really smart, the smartest guys in investing, and they identified a great asset, they identified it at a great price, they had a great run, but it hasn't been a great run for 18 years. And I think Warren at one point said, I think in the early 2000s, that it was probably a mistake not to sell Coke. Of course, today it doesn't make much sense for them because they have so much cash. They'll just end up going to cash, and at least they're getting a few percentage points. And there's a new CEO, and might change. He looks pretty good. After a few decades of idiots running the company, we're back to having intelligent life. So anyway, basically, so if you look at a business like let's say we look at MasterCard. So MasterCard has had an incredible run over the last, since it went public. I don't know the numbers, but I think it might be more than 50x in the last 10 years or so that it's been public. It's been a huge home run. And a lot of smart investors own MasterCard. If you go on Dataroma, you'll find a who's who of investors from probably Todd Coombs at Berkshire. We've got, I think I can pull it up. If you give me a minute, let me just pull up the August list of MasterCard investors. Give me a second, Arvind, because it's quite an interesting list.
Sure. That's great.
Yeah, so the people who own it in descending order of percentage of the portfolio, Chuck Acree, Tom Russo, Sequoia owns it. It's about 7.6%. My good friend Guy Spear, Bill Nygren, Wally White, Tweedy Brown, Tom Gaynor, it's a very small part of his portfolio though, and of course Warren Buffett, which I think is one of the two managers, and such, and so on. So it's an August list of people. Like for Tom Russo, it's like 12.5% of the portfolio. For Chuck Acree, I think it's 13%. So if you ask me what's going to happen to MasterCard from, let's say, 2018 to 2030, I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers are something like Coke. In fact, it would be, if you run the math. I think it's at 50 times trailing earnings. If you run the math using, the market cap versus the current earnings, which is 2% of the market cap, and then you start discounting that, and then look at what kind of return you want, and if I want a 25% return or something, you just can't get there. So I think the thing is that it's not about, in my opinion, buying great assets and holding them forever. I think probably the best thing to do is some middle ground where, if it's a tremendous asset like MasterCard, probably not a bad idea to let it run past 40 or 45 times earnings. But I would say at present prices, I would be a seller. I would take my money and move on.
Mohnish, quick question. You're an active learner and an avid reader. I'm just wondering how many hours, maybe a week or a day, that you were spending reading and researching, and also what are some of your personal traits that you believe have contributed most to your success?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Well, I don't really have a set schedule in the sense what I do try to do is I try to run an empty calendar. Uh, so the only thing I put on my calendar once a year is the Arvind talk, and then I just keep the rest of the calendar empty. And but basically, I mean, I think like this week, I think for example, Arvind's the only guy on my schedule. I mean, I had Turkey earlier this week, but I can't think of anything on my schedule next week or the week after or the week after. And so basically, I try to make sure, I don't enjoy meetings very much. I do enjoy now I enjoy the company visits a lot because I think it's just, you got great professors, better than any professor at any business school other than Arvind. And you got tremendous faculty and you are paying nothing, and these guys are teaching you all kinds of things, which is great. Like I love the cement lessons I got from the CFO in Turkey. It was a blast. And so I think the thing is that the first thing I learned from Buffett and Munger is that you run an empty calendar as much as possible. So don't clutter the schedule. And beyond that, I'm basically a gentleman of leisure. So it depends on what shows up on the radar. I mean, if I am hot and heavy, looking at some business or something, then I'll drop all the other reading and just go into that. And if I don't have enough of that, then I'll go back to the general reading and so on. So it just goes back and forth. And I think that the traits that have helped me, I think it's very important to be excited about life and to be passionate about, your day ahead or your week ahead or whatever else. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say, I rarely do this, but let's say I go have lunch with someone, and all of us are different, but usually when I have these lunches, after I come back, most of the time, I'm not that excited about the way the time was spent. Sometimes I am, most of the time I'm not. And so what I did over the years was I made those types of events very rare. So, you kind of try on different gloves and you just see what fits. And then based on what fits, you just kind of, you increase what you really enjoy in your life and you decrease what you don't enjoy. So I think so part of this you can get to with, psych testing, Myers-Briggs, and maybe with some industrial psychologists and such to really understand who you are. And the closer you are to acting out your inner traits, two things are going to happen. One is you're going to accomplish more, and the second is you're going to be more satisfied. And so I think it's very important to, all of you are, I think, Arvind, are they mostly part-time or full-time?
Mostly full-time.
Yeah, so I think in most of your cases, unfortunately, at this point in your lives, you don't have much choice about your schedule. You pretty much, you've got a busy schedule, a lot of classes, a lot of things you're learning, but hopefully it's fun. I think it should be quite a bit of fun because you have some choice into what classes you're taking. But once you get out into taking jobs or in the real world and so on, I think you want to be really careful about making sure that on a daily basis you are very excited about life. So if you go to work for people, don't take the highest offer, take the person or group or company that you're most passionate or excited about. Also, Buffett says that, don't say I'll do X and then I'll do Y. and then I'll do Z, and after working for someone, I'll do something else. He says that's like saving sex for old age. So I think you want to get to where what your goals are relatively quickly in a straight path rather than a circuitous path. So I think those are the important things. Is I constantly look at how I spend my day, and I'm trying to always tweak it in a way that makes me energized and excited. I mean, I would say that if I, one of the things that's happening that I notice now is that it's hard for me to find enough companies in India to meet when I'm going to India now, because I've met so many of them that now the travel will get more intense to smaller cities and so on. Probably won't be as much fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun when I was meeting 7-8 companies a day in one city. That will probably drop to 2 a day or something, and more flights and such. So not as much fun, but better than zero. So I think just try to get to a lifestyle where the glove fits really well, and tweak it to constantly ask yourself that are you energized and excited. I think if you're passionate and excited about what you're doing, by definition you'll do it very well.
Mohnish, I think that's a great place to stop. So thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and that's just a great note to end on. To focus on what energizes you. That's fantastic.
All right. Well, Arvind, it was another great session. I very much enjoyed it, and thank you, and wish you all the best. Thank you.